Since 2018, trade wars, especially the one between the US and China, have been continuing to capture the headlines around the world. Although the two countries did sit down and had engaged in 11 rounds of high-level trade talks, the lengthy and contentious negotiations could not prevent them from using the most powerful weapon in any trade war: tariffs. Since the trade war started in January 2018, the US has raised 4 rounds of tariffs on China and is currently imposing 25% tariffs on more than $250 billion worth of Chinese goods, accounting for about 43% of all Chinese imports to the US. More tariffs on the remaining 57% are being threatened. In response, China retaliated by imposing up to 25% tariffs on $110 billion worth of US goods, accounting for around 92% of all US goods imported to China. In any real war, the power of weapons, either used in the battlefield or perceived as a threat, is arguably the most decisive determinant of who will ultimately win the war. The same logic probably also applies to the role played by tariffs in trade wars, as tariffs seem to be the main weapon the two countries can rely on to launch attacks against each other. But there is a crucial difference. In a real war, the minute the two countries declare war against each other, both will start to deploy their most powerful and destructive weapons, and would hate not owning the most formidable weapon in the world. While in a trade war, tariffs are a double-edged sword. It is almost impossible to launch an attack without hurting yourself. It is a very tricky weapon, and you have to balance the gains and the losses from using it. So, how do tariffs really work? You may have heard that a tariff was increased to 25%. Clearly, the number had been carefully chosen, but how was it determined? And who pays the tariff? Some people say that a tariff is paid by foreign firms. Other people say that it is actually domestic consumers who bear the burden. Which one is correct? And which country will ultimately gain or lose as a result of the tariff? A tariff is a tax levied by the government on imported goods. Whoever brings foreign goods across the country's borders should pay for the tariffs. They could be domestic firms which directly import foreign goods and use them as inputs in their production, or importers which distribute the imports to consumers through retailers. In either case, the end user of the imports will eventually pay most of the tariff at face value. Tariffs, as the oldest form of trade policy, have been used to serve two purposes. First, it was traditionally a major source of government revenue. Before the introduction of income tax in 1913, tariffs were the largest source of revenue for the US government. For example, in 1792, the US government raised 95% of its revenue from tariffs. However, in 2010, this number was reduced to only 1.2%. The majority of its revenue was collected from income tax and payroll tax, which accounted for 50% and 40% respectively. Nowadays, most governments no longer rely on tariffs as its bread and butter, but still keep using it for its second purpose: protecting domestic industries. Although this practice seems to be working against free competition, its history dates back to the early 19th century, when the United Kingdom passed the famous Corn Laws and imposed tariffs on grains to protect incomes of its farmers. Since then, tariffs have been a legitimate option for a government to protect its local industries. For example, despite the fact that US tariffs have been on a decreasing trend over the past 2 centuries, you would still be able to see huge spikes in tariffs on protected industries. Even for an international organization as pro-free trade as the World Trade Organization, a country is permitted to use tariffs if import competition has become the leading cause of injury to its domestic industry. Clearly, tariffs are deviations from free trade, but people keep imposing them despite the trend towards free trade. So what is the rationale behind it? In addition to the pressure by lobbying groups on politicians to protect local industries that are suffering from trade, as discussed in the previous episode, there is one thing that both politicians and economists agree on. That is, it is sometimes optimal for a country to impose a tariff. We know that trade is better than no trade for a country as a whole, but under some conditions, a country can be even better off by imposing a tariff. This seems to be counterintuitive. Let me explain. Suppose we started from a completely free trade with 0 tariffs, but now the home country wants to impose a 25% tariff on an imported good. As the analysis will crucially depend on how the foreign producers respond to this, we begin with the simpler case in which the foreign producers charge the same price as before. In this case, as the domestic consumers now face a higher price simply due to the tariff, they will cut back the demand for the foreign-produced good. The lower demand and the constant price imply a loss for the foreign producers. In the home country, the government will gain due to the extra tariff revenue, but consumers will lose, as most of the tariff will be passed along to them in the form of higher prices. In addition, the local producers will benefit from the tariff, as they can now sell the good at a higher price and in a larger quantity. This is because the tariff, which makes it more costly to consume the imported good, gives the local producers an opportunity to safely set a price higher than before. They are also willing and able to produce more at the higher price, as the extra supply will be consumed by the consumers who previously chose the imported good but switched to the locally produced one after the tariff. But does the country gain as a whole? The answer is no. After the tariff increase, all consumers of this good can be classified into 4 groups. The first group are the poorer ones, who will completely give up consuming the good due to the higher price. Obviously, they lose from the tariff increase. The second group are those who stick to the imported good. Although they need to pay a higher price due to the tariff, the extra amount they pay is completely absorbed by the government as a tariff revenue. Therefore, the government and the second group as a whole break even as a result of the tariff. The third group of consumers are the ones who always buy the good from the local producers before and after the tariff, while the fourth group are those who bought the imported good before the tariff but switched to the locally produced afterwards. The third group suffer a loss as they have to pay a higher price to the local producers, but the payment is an internal transfer and does not bring any changes to the national welfare. The fourth group also suffer as they need to pay a higher price, but their losses to the national welfare cannot be offset by their payment to the local producers. This is because the fourth group should be able to pay to enjoy the good at a cheaper import price, but now they have to enjoy it at the expense of the less efficient local producers, who probably have to produce it at a higher cost than the previous import price. So the third and fourth groups and the local producers combined will lose from the tariff increase. Therefore, if the foreign firms do not change their supply price, the losses suffered by the poorer group who give up consuming the good and the extra costs local producers have to bear to substitute the imported good are the net loss of the whole of the country. However, under some conditions, foreign firms may find it optimal to charge a price lower than what it was before the tariff increase. This will most likely happen when the foreign producers have limited market power in setting the price and have taken the price as given, in which case if they don't lower the price after the tariff, the domestic consumers of their product will switch to their competitors due to the price difference. But what are the common reasons behind the limited market power? It is usually due to the fact that the foreign producers may only supply a small fraction of the home market, or their products are very similar to those of their competitors and hence can be easily replaced. In addition, the market power in setting the price is likely to be weaker in the long run than in the short run. As in the short run, contracted prices are usually fixed, and it is also difficult to find substitutes, while in the long run, contracts can be renegotiated to reflect the tariff, and consumers will have the time to find alternatives and get used to them. So, in summary, foreign producers are more likely to lower their exporting price in response to a tariff when their price-setting ability in the home market is limited and the tariff increase is permanent. This seems to be consistent with what has happened in history. For example, in August 1980, the US increased the tariff on Japanese compact trucks from 4% to 25%, a rate that remains in effect today. Due to the intense competition faced by the Japanese producers in the US market, the 21% increase in the tariff only resulted in a 13% increase in the consumer price, and the Japanese producers lowered their exporting price by 8%. While in contrast, in April 1983, the US imposed a temporary tariff on Japanese heavy motorcycles. The tariff increase started from 45% but fell annually to 35%, 20%, 15%, and 10% and ended in October 1987. However, the tariff increase had almost no effect on the Japanese producer prices, which could probably be explained by the short-term nature of the tariff. But how does the lower producer prices affect the country as a whole? If foreign firms indeed charge a lower price in response to a tariff, the extra tariff revenue for the government will be greater than the extra amount paid by the domestic consumers who will continue to consume the imported good, as now the extra tariff revenue is partially paid by foreign firms. And it is even possible for the contribution made by foreign exporters to dominate the net loss suffered by the whole country, and the whole country becomes better off. But how to choose the right amount of tariff to maximize the net gain? It can be shown that the optimal tariff usually takes this form. The whole country gains from a small amount of tariff. Then the gain will increase with the tariff, but will reach its maximum eventually, after which the gain will decrease as the tariff increases to the level that prohibits trade. Any level of the tariff above the prohibitive level will no longer change the gain, as there is no trade at all, and the country will stay the same. And as discussed before, the optimal tariffs crucially depend on the market power of the foreign producers in the domestic market. It is likely to be higher for a large country, as foreign producers are more likely to have less market power in a large country. According to this, a large country can usually increase its total welfare by imposing a tariff on goods produced by a foreign country, and the foreign country will lose for sure as a result. Although in this case, it is optimal for the large country to impose a tariff, it is not a guaranteed success, as the above story is only one-sided. We cannot rule out the possibility of revenge by the foreign country if it is also large. By the same logic as shown before, it will probably also be optimal for the foreign country to use tariffs as revenge, and the two countries will end up escalating the trade war through the exchange of tariff hikes. So, how a trade war evolves will crucially depend on which of the above two cases is more likely to happen. As for the trade war between the US and China, the existing findings are mixed. Some people focused on the short-run effect and directly measure how the consumer and producer prices changed after the new tariffs on Chinese goods were introduced in the trade war. They find that almost all tariffs have been passed along to consumers with little effects on producer prices, while other people who use larger samples of historical data to study the long-run effect suggest that a large country like the US can utilize its market power and impose a tariff to increase its welfare, as foreign firms would respond with lower producer prices. In particular, one study, recently cited by the Trump administration as evidence supporting its tariff hikes, finds a 20% pass-through. That is, for a 25% increase in tariff on Chinese goods, only 5% will be paid by US consumers, leaving 20% to be paid by Chinese firms. So, if we put these two strands of findings together, who will pay the tariffs seems largely to depend on how long the trade war will last, and only time can tell the exact number. Thank you for watching this video. Please take time to subscribe if you've enjoyed it, and leave comments below to help us improve as we strive to assist you on your road to becoming a hero.